Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the first in our series of webinars which we put together to assist businesses understand how the way in which we work has changed. COVID has undoubtedly accelerated the places where we are heading, increased use of IT, remote working and a change in work/life priorities. We've been really impressed with all the businesses we deal with to see how they've embraced the instant and dramatic changes imposed upon us all. Just as we thought we may have an idea of what was in front of us, the announcements of this week remind us that we're still in a fragile period in terms of controlling the spread of the virus. Business owners and leaders are balancing the safety of staff and the financial stability of their businesses. Insurers, who we deal with, like all of us, are very uncertain as to what lies ahead. They're very concerned about the impact of the change, the increased exposures to claims, and in particular where increased remote working results in reduced security and controls. They also want to protect employees from the virus and the mental pressures and how that might manifest itself. So we put together 3 webinars to assist recognise the risks and where possible mitigate them. First one is today, Operation Business as Usual, so how technology takes us through a workplace evolution. The next one is going to be next week, looking after home workers. And the one after that will be embracing the future. So what I'd like to do is just introduce our speakers today. We have, I'm Gareth Roberts, the Commercial Director at Sutton Winston, responsible for the commercial team, sales, and get involved with a lot of compliance as well. From Cancom, we have Mark Skelton. Cancom are a digital transformation partner for businesses, enabling them to maximise the potential from their use of IT. And we've also got James Webster, who's from Hiscox, an insurer, have specialist product knowledge, indeed ensuring the risks associated with technology. So before we start, today's session will be around 30 minutes with 15 minutes question and answer. If you've got a question, please, if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section. Tap on that and you can put your questions through. We'll pick those up in that session and answer those. Any that we don't answer, we'll come back to after the session. And then after we've finished, within 24 hours, we'll be recording this and we'll send you a link so that you can and circulate it with colleagues and anybody who may find it of interest. So first of all, I'll introduce you to Mark Skelton. Mark heads up Cancom's professional services division with overall responsible for the UK's technology strategy. He's an expert in digital transformation, workplace transformation, and he's passionate about bridging the gap between technology and what's practical for your business.
Brilliant.
Mark, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Gareth, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you all this morning, really. So as the title of this section describes, I'm going to try and talk you through what we're seeing and what I'm seeing when I'm talking to CIOs of organisations, really, about how the workplace environment has changed, and it has been accelerated this year. I mean, COVID is obviously a very bad thing for everyone involved, but actually from an IT transformation perspective, it's really helped technology organisations like us help really change the IT landscape, because there's been a real need for the change in working styles, I guess. But whenever I talk about what's happening this year, I kind of look back a little bit and do a bit of a review of what's happened in the workplace, certainly over the last 20 years, but also where is it going. And at certain points we've had some key transformational changes that's happened. Obviously, it started with the VIX workstations being PC on every desk coming into the enterprise, but then with the mobility really started when BlackBerry started to kickstart in the industry, and we started to take the technology on the move, being able to consume data like email, for example, on the move. And we saw virtualization then come in as well, sort of consolidation of workplace resources, really, to try and reduce the amount of costs being spent on enabling IT services to end users. But then the real transformation piece for me is it started to happen in the last couple of years, and it's driven by the likes of Microsoft, the likes of Citrix, VMware. These big technology vendors have driven this mobile cloud first kind of philosophy, that's helped us really kickstart where we are today. And what we call it today, and what we call it as an organisation, is modern workplace. But in essence, it's delivering the 5 key things that you see there on the slide: working anywhere, anytime, any device, collaboratively and securely. But when I really summarise it, it's that picture at the top. You know, what we're trying to do, and what actually COVID has helped us do and accelerate, is build the technologies that allow your end users to consume IT services in a fashion that they want to. You know, that might be from home, which is the common scenario today, might be from coffee shops, might be from trains, it might be wherever they need to be to perform their actions and their activities, rather than being confined to a desk. So we can jump to the next slide. So where the workplace market today, it is growing. And what's quite interesting is the amount of money being spent on workplace solutions is growing despite there being a downturn in overall IT spend this year. So Gartner are saying that there's a 7.9% downturn in IT spend this year, but we're seeing the workplace environment actually increasing in spend. We've seen a 25% increase in the amount of money and projects coming through that are being spent on workplace. And really why that is because IT departments have kind of come into this year being a bit behind where they needed to be. And then obviously the COVID crisis hit earlier in the year, and IT departments are really scrabbling around trying to enable remote working and home working in a lot of scenarios. There were some businesses that were very, very good and had the infrastructure and the setup ready to go. But we saw a lot of organizations that actually weren't ready, so didn't have good, robust working from home solutions. We saw some organizations quoting people of when they could work and when they couldn't work. You know, bizarre stories like that coming through. We also saw a lot of end users in organizations starting to use consumer apps to be able to communicate and collaborate. I won't name the names, but I saw one organization using Houseparty of all things to work with their colleagues or communicate with their colleagues because their IT department couldn't provide solutions that were robust enough in the time frame they needed to. So IT departments have been challenged, and they're, you know, what's happening is that's why we're seeing this increase in spend. And I guess some of the things that, you know, we are definitely seeing as a trend in the industry is the amount of devices per head is growing. And this is going back to the point I was making on the previous slide about end users wanting to be able to consume the applications and data on whatever devices suit the scenario that they're in. So they might want to use their iPads, their iPhones, their Android phones, their work PC. And generally, it's how do you make all the technologies work across all of those different device ecosystems. And I guess the last point I make here is also we're seeing a big shift in the type of devices, but also premium devices coming through as well. And I think this is driven through the sort of the consumerization of IT, if you want to call it that. And a lot of your end users will have devices that they've purchased on their own. So they may have gone and bought an iPad or an Apple Mac or a Surface Pro for their own personal use. So they've bought a premium device, and then when they shift to a work environment, they're quite often getting a lesser device supplied to them from their IT department. So what IT departments are now challenged with is providing those more premium devices, and we're definitely seeing a shift, you know, in that in terms of the supply to their end users. So we are seeing the likes of the Surface Pros, the high-end HP Ink devices, the Lenovo Yogas, those types of things now being commonplace in terms of what they're delivering. So we can flip forward. The other thing that IT departments are challenged with is of old, the work environment was nice and contained. So end users sat in an office or sat in a governed place where IT could control, the networks could control everything. With the changes that have been forced on us due to the pandemic this year, we're seeing now the scenarios really starting to change. The bulk load of the workers are no longer in the office; they're working from home. They are mobile. You know, as people are starting to come back to the office, or might be now reversing back, given the government's guidance this week. It's all about flexibility. You don't know where your workers are going to be on a permanent basis anymore. So you've got to provide the technologies to allow this to happen. We're also seeing a rise in the field worker scenario. How do you supply IT services to field workers, whether it's facility management, people in your organization, those types of things? You know, they need to consume IT as well in a controlled way. But then if we look at the offices as well, as we saw a trend over the last few weeks as the offices were starting to reopen, we saw a lot of CIOs coming to us and say, well, great, we've now invested all this great WYSI technology now to enable home working. How do we enable this hybrid scenario? I've got people working at home, I've got some people in the office. I want the same experience as it, you know, to apply in our meeting rooms. So we're seeing a lot of drive and demand around enabling meeting rooms with, you know, whether it's Zoom-based capability or Teams, as an example. How can they have that interaction and experience when you're sitting in an office, as well as some people sitting at home? And then the last, I guess, trend around the workplace that we're seeing is this new concept of different workspaces. We're spending a lot of our time working with facility management teams, but organizations that are masters at looking at how the offices are set up. Offices are no longer just meeting rooms and desks. We have these things called huddle rooms, collaboration spaces coming in, and IT are challenged with the technology that fits those and the devices those fits those. You might want interactive whiteboards because you want a more creative kind of scenario in a collaboration space, for example, but then you still want to be able to communicate people with that working from home. So all of this is a real challenge for IT, and it's certainly what we're seeing a huge trend around at the moment. If we can flip to the next slide, please. But the other, I guess, the four mega trends that we're seeing this year, driven by the changes in the market, we're seeing device as a service become really prevalent. So back to some of the points that I was making previously, we're seeing organizations investing heavily in more premium devices. Now, with more premium devices, that does mean increased cost. And what we're seeing is a lot of organizations wanting to spread that cost out rather than a lumpy CapEx upfront cost. Device as a service is effectively a lease model for buying those devices. So you can stretch the payment, I guess, of those devices over the lifetime of let's say a 2 or 3 year period. But also what we're seeing is, of old, IT departments would buy a lot of devices up front, but the reality is the projects would take a while to roll them out. So that means you might have 6 months where a device is sitting on a shelf unused and depreciating as an asset. And the whole device as a service concept is that we can deliver devices as and when the projects need them and roll them out. But it's also a managed service wrap around device as a service as well. So when that device is coming to end of life, we can automatically swap in, swap out for the latest device, or if the user wants to change the type of device, those device as a service offerings kind of allow that flexibility. And then building up on that, really, modern workplace as a service is taking it to the next level. So that as well as supplying a device on a flexible contract and capability, what we're seeing also is lots of IT organizations wanting to take the rest of the ecosystem. So a device is great, but you need the applications, you need the operating system, you need the other components sitting on top of it. And with the drive towards cloud technology, so things like Office 365, for example, we can now supply all of those other layers as a service as well and deliver that as a managed service wrap to organizations. And if I flip over to security, and I know we're going to cover security in a bit more detail in this webinar, but security is a massive challenge this year. It's been kicked into life really by the change in working styles. So there's lots of cyber terrorists out there that now think there's a greater opportunity to attack organizations. And for example, we've seen a 500% rise in phishing attacks since the end of February through our security services that we run. And this demand, this drive in volume, I guess, is driving the need for organizations to think about security in a very different way. So we're consulting a lot now with organizations around how we use artificial intelligence engines with security products to deliver that volume and protection, because the security landscape is ever changing at the moment, and humans just can't keep up with the threats that are coming through. So you need AI-driven tools behind the scenes to be able to manage the threat landscape. And then I guess the last trend that it was fairly obvious that what we've seen this year is the drive in digital collaboration. One of the things that we're blessed with being in the office is the ability to communicate one-on-one and get things done. Now, when you're working from a home scenario, you need a tool. You need tools, robust tools, to be able to collaborate. You can argue we've probably gone a bit too far in a lot of organisations. I'm hearing the word Zoom fatigue or Teams fatigue being quite common in the workplace now. But these tools have been essential, yeah, and they have absolutely skyrocketed this year. I think the latest stat for Zoom, for example, is 140 million daily active users. This thing has become essential now to how we're communicating in organisations, but also in sort of people's personal lives as well. But the one challenge that we've seen is, how do we enable the users to understand how to use this technology? Some of the basics are simple, but we've seen a lot of demand in CIOs building teams around change and adoption management. So it's about how, rather than just dropping technology out to your end users and just saying, assuming they can use it, it's about how do you put the right training packages together? How do you use the technology in the right way for your role? I guess we've seen a huge demand in that space. So if we could flip to the next slide, please. So I guess trying to keep this at a very high level, and I've whittled through my pieces quite quickly, but what key things do I want to land that I guess you can take away from this? So I guess the first thing that I'll talk about is COVID has accelerated change. But it's also I guess people have embraced change more this year than I've ever seen. Change has always been hard from a technology perspective in organizations, because end users, because I guess they're not educated well enough around technology, are always quite reticent to change. But actually this year we've seen a very different trend. People want this technology, people need this technology, so they're way more accepting of IT departments rolling things out in a lot speedier fashion, getting things delivered so that they can carry on with their day-to-day job. So what I'm encouraging IT departments and CIOs to think about is, now is actually time to be bold with a lot of these changes and start to accelerate through some of the programs that you might be looking to work through, because there is that acceptance. And I guess the other key things I want to leave you with is security specifically, because it's such an important topic and it's such a big issue for us all. It needs to be dynamic, and if you're not looking at how you deal with security and with a bit more robust technology behind it, you need to be, because the threat landscape is only ever increasing at the moment, and they're getting very clever with some of these attacks, and you need the technology and services behind. And I guess the last point I'll make is, IT needs to be thinking about the end users. And it's all about giving the best experience from these workplace services to empower your users to be able to do what they need to do from these different working scenarios we find ourselves in. So it's all about giving users choice, making them feel empowered with technology, so they can deliver their day-to-day tasks. But labouring on that change and adoption acceptance piece and that training around it, that's where IT really need to focus on. So with that, Gareth, I think that's my final piece. I mean, there's Q&A at the end, so I'm more than happy to ask questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. I think really interesting. You've covered areas there that I think certainly our board have been talking about for the last couple of months and are considering for the future. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are attending today have had those thought processes. So you've taken us through it very well. Thank you. James is the head of specialty claims for Hiscox. Previously was a solicitor working in a private practice. And he leads the media, cyber and technology teams within Hiscox, dealing with domestic and international cyber claims. So James, over to you to give us some more behind what we're facing at the moment.
Thank you, Gareth. So if we could roll on to the first slide, please. So first, I was just going to talk about what we mean by cyber claims, by cyber crime, so we can then see what that means in the COVID world. So cyber criminals are like any other criminals. They're in it for the money. Historically, their focus was really on, and I'm talking probably about 10 years or so ago, the focus was really on securing credit card information or healthcare information and then selling that on the dark web. And I think for that reason, most businesses weren't in the crosshairs of cyber criminals. that's really changed over the last, certainly within the last 5 years. And cyber criminals, while that is still happening, for the most part, they're looking for I suppose, a quicker buck, and looking to get the money more quickly. And what we see at Hiscox, and I know what others see much more widely, is they're really doing this in two key ways. One is effectively stealing funds by diverting funds that should be going one place into their bank accounts, and the other is through extortion. So if we talk about the theft piece first, Mark mentioned phishing attacks earlier, and that's absolutely what happens in the vast majority of the theft cases that we see. Criminals will send out large numbers of emails that will look like they're from legitimate sources and will typically have some kind of call to action. So it will look like you've got an email from American Express inviting you to alerting you about a fraudulent payment and inviting you to log into your account to do something about it. Or it might be from Netflix to say that your account's been your subscription's been cancelled, and log in if you want to reactivate it. And these look incredibly convincing, very much like the legitimate emails that American Express, Netflix, and other corporations send out. You then click on a link and put in your username and password. And if that username and if you're somebody who has the same password for everything across the board, whether it's your banking details or your Netflix account, then it may well be the same for your remote email account as well. And then you've given the criminals your login details for your work email account. And then typically they will focus on people in organizations who are responsible for making payments or sending invoices out, and they will send communications out from your email address saying we've changed our account details, or may even change invoices themselves with different account details put on them and send those out, and will also put rules in place on your account so that whatever reply comes back goes to them and isn't seen by you, the actual user. Extortion we see in a couple of ways. I suppose most commonly is through ransomware attacks, which I'm sure many of you will have read about in the press. This is where malicious software is downloaded onto your systems. Sometimes that's because an attachment's been opened that's come in via an email. Sometimes it's just gone directly onto the systems from the attackers. Will decrypt all of your systems, and unless you want to pay a ransom, and then they will give you a decryption key. And often those ransoms, certainly 2 or 3 years ago, we were seeing ransoms at very low levels, so a few £1,000s. More recently, there's been, well, certainly greater inflation of ransom demands than there has in the rest of the world. And what we've started to see as a trend more recently is that the attackers will often steal data from your systems, and in addition, before they deploy the ransomware, and then in addition to requiring a ransom to restore your systems, they'll also want a separate ransom not to do anything with the data that they've stolen. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So what have we seen during lockdown? So I suppose, first of all, we've seen more of what I've just been talking about. So over the 6 months or so that we've had lockdown, we've had a 40% uptick in cybercrime notifications at Hiscox. Well, we're still seeing the same types of claims. So we're still seeing ransomware attacks. We're still seeing business email compromise and then payment diversion fraud. Off the back of that, it's had a bit more of a COVID flavor. So the emails and the text messages with these calls to action look as though not from American Express or Netflix, but they're from HMRC inviting you to take part in a furlough scheme, or advising you that you're entitled to a tax rebate. Or it might be from the NHS with information about a vaccine. So, or it might just be from businesses claiming to be the less sophisticated end, businesses claiming to be PPE providers. And we've seen remote working and furlough helping criminals. So the furlough has meant obviously that most businesses have got fewer people on the ground. What that can often mean is that the people who are on the ground are more stretched than they would be normally. So if they're getting an email that looks legitimate, they're not paying as much attention to it or questioning it as hard as they might have done in normal times. And also with remote working, it's not as though people are all around an office and they get a suspicious email and you just turn to the person to your left or right, or stand up or go out of your office and say, I've had this text, email, whatever, it looks a bit fishy to me, because most people are sitting in a spare bedroom or the living room or the kitchen, and don't have that, I suppose, the same face time that they do with colleagues normally. So we're seeing more people clicking on links and or opening attachments. So what can you do to protect your business? So cybersecurity, absolutely. Engage Mark and his colleagues and take as much advice from them as you can. But also there's, at a more simple level, I suppose, education of employees. What we see, the vast majority of the claims that we see at Hiscox are human error. People have opened an email that they shouldn't have done, or have accessed an email, or have followed a link to an email that they shouldn't have done. So educating your team about how to spot suspicious emails, suspicious text messages, and what they should do if they do get one. Not just ignore it, but also share it with the wider business so everybody is live to this threat. And secondly, I'd talk about culture. So it's really important that the culture of your business is one where people do think they can safely hold their hand up and say, this doesn't look quite right to me, without fear of having their head bitten off. The worst thing you can have is somebody gets an email, they don't think it's quite right, but they think, if I ask my boss about this, all I'm going to do is get snapped at, so I'll just assume it's legitimate and I'll proceed with it. I'll hand over back to you, Gareth.
Thank you, James. So just making sure I unmute myself, getting used to this. So that's really interesting, and a common theme, I think, really coming through, which is what we're finding as well, is it is the education process. And I think we've all got a varying degree of IT knowledge and experience and capability. I try and keep it very simple myself, because when people talk to me too quickly about IT, I get lost. I'm the wrong generation. I'm trying my best and I'm recognizing it. I'm trying to embrace it. But I think I was just born too late to be as good as some people will be. And it's recognizing that as a manager, isn't it? So really good insights there. So questions and answers, we've got a couple coming in. So I encourage people to please continue putting your questions in. Just to start off, we have one question was coming in saying, how do you protect your company data when working from home or anywhere out of the office? So I think that's probably one for you, Mark.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Gareth, I can pick that up. So I referenced it in my section, really, about using technology to try and protect things. And one of the things that I am encouraging organizations to think about is data protection technologies. And these are accessible to a lot of organizations now. Most organizations are consuming things like Microsoft Office 365, for example. There's technologies in there that we can turn on to protect data. And I guess back to your point there, Gareth, about actually, do users need to care about this stuff? Well, if an IT environment is doing its job properly, they shouldn't care about this. Should be invisible and transparent behind the scenes, right? And these technologies that do sit there, so things like Microsoft's Advanced Threat Protection, which is part of the standard Office 365 suite that we can provide that kind of protection of the data. You can classify things automatically and those types of things behind the scenes, so the user doesn't need to think about it. The data is protected. And it can then be transmitted across home networks, coffee shops, all those kind of things securely, and it's controlled. So there's some key technologies in there, and I won't go into too much of the weeds and take my technical hat off for a second. But there's a bunch of technologies that can be used to provide that protection of data.
That's good, thank you. We're all very aware of our turnover and our income being under control at the moment because of what could be coming and what's already hit us. And you mentioned earlier that IT spend is down generally, but although the business IT spend seems to be increasing, so I know it'll be different for different businesses. But what would your view be as the best technology to invest in over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I think you've probably saw a theme between what James and I presented today. That security is such a hot topic at the moment. It's the biggest risk I think IT are providing. I think most IT departments have already got to grips with the home working and have provided some solution in some shape or form for that, because we're quite way down the line. But I think the security landscape is I know we're probably doing a bit of scaremongering here, but it's changing and increasing at such a rate. Not having the right technologies in there is a huge risk for organizations to be able to provide that protection and defense mechanism. But then also the education around that, I guess, is key. And that's, if I was putting my money in one thing to spend this year, that's where I'd be putting my money. Okay,
that's interesting. James, in terms of claims trends, where do you think they will go? I mean, it's interesting to get a feel from you in terms of the average payments that are going out, and whether it's one large one versus multiple small ones, and whether that trend has changed and where you see it going.
So I suppose just on what these things can cost, I think like any type of claim, we get some big ones and we get some small ones. I'd say at the lower end, they typically cost between £10,000 and £20,000, which will be for a combination of restoring systems and also taking advice on any legal implications. GDPR has meant that certainly more often than not, these cases need to be notified to the ICO, and so unfortunately you need to engage lawyers as well as IT forensics experts to find out what's happened, and then some cases PR as well. So I'd say at the bottom end, 10 to 20,000. Typically, the majority are say less than 50,000, but then we do get some really big ones that are in the hundreds of thousands or millions. In terms of trends, I think we're probably still going to continue to see a lot of ransomware and a lot of payment diversion fraud. The big trend that we've seen over the last probably 6-12 months is businesses, is law firms looking to bring claims off the back of this. So I think this is really going to be like the next big trip and slip area. So individuals find out that their personal information was compromised because either somebody's been into an email account where that personal data existed, or it was the subject of a ransomware attack, and the data has now been corrupted. And we've seen a number of law firms popping up who are looking to, I suppose, industrialize this process and really do it. I think we're going to see a lot more like post-breach third-party claims by data subjects, and there are a couple of quite interesting cases going through the courts at the moment that are really going to determine whether or not I suppose this is a huge problem or just a big one.
Yeah, so it does feel at the moment like one sector that's definitely winning out of all this is the lawyers, isn't it? They've got plenty to work with at the moment, and are inventing more avenues. So
yeah,
it does keep us on our mettle, doesn't it, in terms of making sure we're doing everything we should do, and then close down all the gaps.
The lawyers and the criminals. So
yeah.
Draw from that what you will.
So in terms of obviously we can put in physical security on our IT, and we can train our people, but what methods do you recommend to try and test that what we've done is the right way to secure our IT systems?
Yes, I'll pick that one up. So there's a number of ways you can do this. So there's obviously the classic kind of pen testing kind of your environments. There's plenty of companies out there, us being one of them, that can provide services to test your security, both from a perimeter in, but sort of inside out kind of testing as well. So it's getting those consultants in to have a look at things. But equally, what I would encourage people to think about is there is lots of free tools out there now to simulate things like phishing attacks. So doing it in a controlled way, just to really test how your users are educated around how to deal with some of the things that James and I have talked about. But you're doing it in it where IT are controlling it, and then you can see how much of a risk you're really carrying with the education and the tools that are in place with your own users. And I can follow up with plenty of links to free tooling to do that. It's a very low cost to do that kind of test, and I'm trying to encourage organisations to do that on a regular basis. Actually, not all the time, because that become a bit annoying for end users, but it's all about building that education and awareness around what a phishing email might look like, for example.
That's interesting, Mark, because we went through a process ourselves, and it's no coincidence, I guess, that James's firm, Hiscox, were the ones who did the phishing expeditions. So they did a kind of phishing attack on Sutton Winson, and I mean, we've had total confidentiality on the responses because, of course, we don't want to be naming and shaming. So we sat around the board table all saying, "Come on, tell us what happened." But I think what the important thing is it taught us that there are people who are vulnerable. I myself was sat on a call and an email allegedly from the MD saying, "Can you ring me urgently about something?" And I did respond just to say, "I'm on a call, I'll catch you later." But in about an hour's later, we realised that somebody was trying to get something actioned and to invest in something and buy Amazon vouchers or something it was. But it shows you with everybody in a busy, stretched world, you try and deal things quickly and maybe don't think things through, don't you?
Yeah, and they're just becoming so sophisticated nowadays that it's difficult, even with the trained experts, to look at these things and spot it immediately. So it's a challenge, but just using these simulation tools, I guess, and going through online training. There is plenty of, I'd say there's another question about online training around cybersecurity. Yeah. There's plenty of resources now, and I'm more than happy to follow up, and we can send some communications out about some recommended portals and things like that to do some training around this stuff. But quite often it's about education, because there's only so much you can control with technology.
Yeah, that's good. We did have a question. So Claire, you've asked us about the best way to educate staff. So I think Mark has picked up on some interesting links. I think what I say in terms of risk management and educating people, we've in the past I've done a lot with vehicles, so not with cyber, but about driver training, and what we find. I mean, this is moving all the time. So I think you might come up with a really good training exercise and a great seminar which captures everybody's attention. But what we're looking to do is embrace a behaviour change and understanding. And I think so managers have got a response to keep talking about it, keep it fresh, and make it part of something we talk about all the time, so that we don't just think, "Oh, right, we've done that bit now, we've talked about cyber security, everybody got it." Actually, what they need to do is get it, understand it, and be aware of it all the time. And then I guess what we're seeing is this rampant change that's coming through, and we just have to continue to build with it. It's going to be with us forever, I guess, isn't it? And that's what you'll be worried about, James, in terms of handling claims and defending claims, and
Indeed, yeah. Keeps a roof over all of our heads, though.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, guys. Well, I think we've kind of we've covered all the questions that have come in. So thank you ever so much, guys, for taking time out to talk to us and our audience this morning. And we'll be in touch with all the people who have joined us. And I think we'll do a follow up. And I think, as I think Mark mentioned earlier, he said, he's finding with webinars that these things are best shared, and we get far more people coming to them afterwards and using them. So feel free then to use Sutton Winson as a conduit, and we'll feed you into James and Mark with any questions and answers. So thank you ever so much. We've got 2 more seminars to come. One will be about looking after your home workers. So that's mental health and how you deal with the HR side of things. And then the last session will be embracing the future, which will be all about how we work in this hybrid workplace and adapting our workplace. I know we've been having team calls every day, and it's been great for our business. But then we've now got people in the office, so we're trying to work out how we do part at home, part in the office, and we're getting there. But we've got somebody who can come in and help with configuration of an office to make that work, which I think was where we're heading in this hybrid world. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll follow up with a copy of this, and I wish you well. Thank you.